it's about having an economy that needs to be visible to people so that they can see, how the transactions are being made.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Craft Podcast. Today, our guest is Vic, who most recently was a lead product manager at Zynga, but he's been a product manager in games at Amazon, EA, Machine Zone, and many other companies. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
So this might be a very obvious question, but we ask it to all of our guests.
Uh-huh.
How would you describe your craft?
My craft, it's something I think honestly evolved over the years. Like starting right at the beginning, I actually started as an engineer because I just loved coding. It was really fun creating kind of something out of nothing. And I really enjoyed working with my hands there. And then, I went to grad school at Carnegie Mellon, and that's where I really started enjoying the business side a lot more. And I wanted to explore kind of the conjunction of these things. So I started working in consulting with the original aim that I get to work at many different companies and so on. But I got this really good opportunity in banking, and that's where I actually used to do VBA coding at the time, even though I was on the management side. And I'm like, I really love this new thing called analytics. And I may be dating myself here, but over a decade ago, you didn't have classes for it. There wasn't a lot you could do outside of SQL. So I think that's where my craft really started off as a product manager and leveraging analytics. I said, okay, what do I love? I love tech. I've always been a techie. Maybe I want to join the tech industry. And long story cut short, when I was couch surfing at a friend's, his roommate turned out to work at Disney Games at the time, and he introduced me to this world of gaming. Except I had no idea what DAU and ARPU and what all these metrics were. But I worked hard. I read up a bunch, met a lot of people at conferences, and then finally broke my way into the gaming industry. And that's where I leveraged the analytics skills that I had into learning product management. So the first time I was a lead analyst, then I became a PM handling monetization. Then at the Japanese gaming company DNA, I learned design and live ops. And I'm like, oh, I love this live ops thing, which is the best company doing that. And it was Machine Zone. So I'm like, okay, let's do this in Machine Zone. They're top of the app stores. And then I said, okay, I've never made a game from scratch. What does that look like? So I went to Amazon, learned how to do early game development. And then one of the things I'd always been super curious about was the marketing side. So I came to Zynga, where I was actually leading cross promotion for the company, seeing how can you make people play more games within the company. So to answer your question in summary, I think product management is a craft which has so many different facets to it
Mm-hmm.
that you can do whatever you enjoy. So in my story, I started off as an analyst, and then I learned monetization, design, live ops, marketing. And I think every experience you have is kind of one more arrow in the quiver that you can add to your arsenal, and that makes you a better PM.
And would you say you specialize in mobile game PM?
I think based on all the opportunities I've
Yeah.
had, even though I've been an old school PC gamer, I used to play
Yeah.
competitively back in the day. I have specialized a bit in the mobile side, mostly because the free to play economy and my specialization being monetization and live operations. But that's why I'm actually joining Meta as my next game,
Hmm.
because I want to expand those horizons. No pun
Right. Right.
intended. But I want to expand and see,
Yeah.
what can I apply those to different products? Does it have to be games? Could it be something different? Who knows?
Yeah. And the only reason I asked about the mobile games part is because when you're working in the game industry, you notice that
Hmm.
PMs in mobile are a bit different than PMs in PC and in console, etc. I would say, generally speaking, a lot of people would consider mobile game PMs more analytical, which could be because it's like faster development cycles, and turning, like, making out new games, and
Hmm.
then just a focus on like just faster changes.
Hmm.
Whereas I feel like League of Legends probably set the standard for like 2 week dev updates,
Hmm.
but many games don't even do that, even if
Yeah.
it's like a live service,
Yeah.
which makes sense because you start off as you said, like in analytics and as an analyst. But beyond what I just said,
Mhm.
have you noticed any, or what would you say are like big differences between PMs per platform, if that's even something you observe. Let's say like mobile, PC versus console.
Sure. So I think the thing is, in this particular example, I would club like PC, let's say League of Legends, along with
Hmm.
mobile games because it's a very
Ah,
similar
okay.
development cycle, right? It's the same live events, same live
Yeah.
ops, 2 week updates. So there's nothing different in that. Where it differs is between general AAA PC console versus kind of free to play. Instead of just saying
Hmm.
mobile, I
Hmm.
call it
Hmm.
free to play. And the reason for that is about how games are developed, whether they are producer first or whether they're PM first. And I think that's the key difference. So, for example, right, I've been playing a ton of Elden Ring. I love
Yeah.
that game, but in that game, as a product manager, I'm not sure how I could contribute to that, right? It's about these large, beautiful worlds that are there, these amazingly designed bosses and challenges and dungeons. But that's a ton of design work, right? And as I mentioned, I briefly did some design, but
Hmm.
that's
Hmm.
not my specialty. I'm good at monetization, but there's not a lot I can do in that in Elden Ring. And there's also not a lot of live ops. So as a free to play PM, I couldn't really contribute there, but a really strong producer who could, like keep in touch with these hundreds of tweens doing the artwork, the production work, like that's what you really need. So I think it comes down to, are you making a producer driven game or a PM driven game?
That is a really good framework because we've had other PMs on, and we haven't described it in this framework. I like this more because Elden Ring is a perfect example. I mean, it's also a fun game, premium
Mhm.
game, and you're right. Like I haven't really thought about it as like a PM driven game versus like producer. So that's a good analogy. You know, different game studios and just like different games in general. I've noticed that there are at the minimum producers, product managers, sometimes a TPM, sometimes dev managers, sometimes even project managers. You got
Mhm.
like five, potentially up to five categories. Have you worked in on a game or in a company where there's lots of involvement between a producer and a PM, or is it going to just be more segmented, like a producer first game versus a PM first game?
I think even though we may segment game
Hmm.
development in kind of PM versus producer first, right? When it comes down to the actual nitty gritty, especially on the free to play side,
Hmm.
there will
Hmm.
always be producers that you work with, right? Especially for
Okay.
largest title, unless you're a 5 people game studio where you're wearing multiple hats. In fact, I would say as a PM, kind of my right hands, and here I have more than one,
Hmm.
is the lead producer, the engineering manager, the head of marketing, and the head of analytics, right? These are the 4 people you work with day and day, right? The
Hmm.
producer, they help you execute, right? They're in charge of making sure the trains run on time, nothing untoward happens, all the releases come out on time, QA delivers, so and engineering gets the features out. So everything runs because of them, right? UA and marketing, they help your player inflow. If you have no acquisition, then nothing is coming in. So they handle all of that for you. Engineering managers in this case, work hand in hand with the production folks. That's where you go for new features and longer
Hmm.
term development. And lastly, kind of analytics makes you run the whole thing. As a PM, I definitely write my own SQL sometimes and run my own code, but for the deep dive stuff, you really need them. So I think
Right.
you work with all of them together, and without any one of them, it becomes really, really difficult.
Yeah, that makes sense. And kind of maybe even like pivoting this to a new topic
Uh-huh.
is just making games is hard, obviously. Like that's like the making fun part. But
Yeah.
even just like the practical making of the game and operating it with all the folks you just mentioned, it's a lot of people. And a hot topic now, even though there's a big downturn in the NFT crypto market, is like Web3 games.
Hmm.
So a lot of companies raised really big Series A's, like 20, 25 million,
Hmm.
and now everybody wants to build a game. But I think people don't really understand the true costs of doing so and the
Hmm.
timeline, right?
Yeah.
Like yeah, we'll launch a game by the end of 2021 or end of
Yeah.
2022 if I just raise the money now. And I don't think they know about like all the folks you mentioned, like
Hmm.
engineering, production, marketing,
Hmm.
analytics, and just everything involved to even have a shot at making something good, not even guaranteeing good,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So on that topic, once again, it's definitely a controversial topic. So, but I've been interviewing like PMs and game
Hmm.
designers on this topic, and also just even folks who work on the specific gaming related chains or
Hmm.
chains that are promoting gaming.
Hmm.
What are your general thoughts as someone who has just worked in the gaming space for over a decade? Like,
Hmm.
is this, a nothing burger?
Hmm.
Is there potential here, or is this just like another way for companies to raise money? Like, how do
Hmm.
you see, it's a broad topic, like Web3 or blockchains get involved in games?
Got it. Yeah. So I think for me, right, as a PM, when I get this kind of question, I start by taking a step back, right? What is blockchain about for me as a consumer, especially in gaming? It's about visibility and it's about ownership, right? That is something that you didn't have in the financial system before. So in banking, right, if somebody buys something or sells something, I have no idea. It's in the ether. But in this, I can see it. And when you look at the concept of ownership and visibility, how do you apply that to games and where does it fit in, right? If I am buying a battle pass in a game, does everybody really need to know? Do they care if I buy a battle pass? Not really, right? But it leads me to one of the systems I actually wrote in my blog post, geeksmirage.com, many years ago. But it was about the Diablo 3 auction house.
Hmm.
And that is the kind of system where I could really see this work well. Why? Because at that time, the auction house was very controversial. Diablo 3 actually wound up shutting it down because what happened is that they designed a beautiful game, but you could use the auction house to skip progress. So, for example, if I'm playing, Act 1 and I need these really strong weapons to get to Act 2, I could grind for 20 hours or spend 1,000 gold or $1 and then buy the weapon and skip ahead. So, within 2 days, I had reached the end of the game and I had nothing to do. But if you had blockchain, and then the other part I forgot to mention is I still remember this weapon called an Echoing Fury that somebody dropped a perfect one, and on eBay somebody sold it for $15,000.
Wow.
Right, and at least this one was on eBay. But sometimes people do PayPal transactions, you get scammed. It's a really rough world out there. But with blockchain, right, you could not only make this open, you would also make it visible to everybody. So now everybody knows what the price is. Imagine if you could layer on a nice UI on the top, then everything is happening real time. And it almost reminds me of the Steam marketplace, where you can actually, if you're buying weapons in CSGO, all the price history is there on these third party websites and it's visible. I can see, how the weapon was priced a year ago. I can see how many people bought it and so on. So it's about having an economy that needs to be visible to people so that they can see, how other transactions are being made. So one example, like I mentioned, is an auction house. The other one, which is probably my dream scenario, is about ownership, which
Hmm.
is okay, how can I distribute ownership in the digital age? And in gaming, the example that comes best to mind is something like Magic the Gathering or a CCG, a collectible card game. Right now, I've been in the gaming industry for almost a decade now, and I have had colleagues who've flown in from other countries to attend Magic tournaments in the US. I've had them come and swap cards and buy cards in person because these are such high value cards. You don't want to just, send them by post and then they never arrive. So in this case, imagine if you could make a CCG on the blockchain, right? Where even if the game developer ceases to exist, the cards are still there. They hold value. It's easy to exchange them back and forth. So it's about having a purpose for the stuff you own. So, going back to the original thing, it's about ownership, visibility, and then actually be having a purpose to doing something with. So with an NFT, I can own an NFT and I can own one of the apes that are there, but what's the point beyond it's cool or it has implicit value right now? I think if you can provide a purpose to it, then you can really go places. And like you said, it's much easier said than done. But
That's such a good example. And one of our previous game designers talked about Diablo, the auction house as well.
uh-huh.
And I think we could learn a lot from history. And also, once you get past the hype, just go into like, hey, what is the purpose of this?
Hmm.
And like, do I need to use this specific technology or this specific brand? I feel like Web3 is a little bit of like a brand. It's
Hmm.
captured like consumer
Yeah.
attention.
Yeah.
So even though you can solve it via
Hmm.
a centralized database,
Hmm.
it might be more exciting to do it that way.
Exactly.
I want to talk a bit about economies because
Hmm.
I feel like that is something most PMs are responsible for in a game. I guess, I have like two questions. One's like, how does one get started in
Hmm.
thinking about designing an economy? Like, I
Hmm.
actually, I got a degree in economics, but I've heard, but I haven't designed an economy myself. Are real world economic lessons applicable to
Hmm.
these essentially digital economies? Like,
Hmm.
where is your starting point?
Got it. So I'll say that if you like reading about economies, one of my favorite articles of all time is by this chief economist at Steam, who then went on to become the chief economist for Greece
Yeah.
after it was done. So he was in the government in Europe, and then suddenly he gets an email from this random guy called Gabe, and he's like, "Who's this guy? I don't know." And it was Gabe Newell who had reached out to him that, "Hey, we have Steam, we have this live database of users and this large economy. We just need an expert to come handle it." And this was over a decade ago, so you have to
Hmm.
look a little bit into the cash and so on. But
Yeah.
it was a really good article about they hired one of the leading economists in the world to come and work on the Steam economy, and then later he's actually handling the huge financial crisis that happened. So I think there are real life implications for sure. I'll send you the article after our
Uh-huh.
talk. It's really,
Sure.
really fun to read,
Awesome.
because it's about a person who has no idea about games just hearing from one of the topmost game creators in the world. So I think there are definitely real world implications, because think about it. If you're an economist, and by no measure am I one, but you always theorize about stuff and you have models, you can't really put them into practice because they're theoretical. But in gaming, you actually have a real life world. Like, that's where this concept of metaverse comes in. But think about it, World of Warcraft, right? That's its own economy. Or Diablo 3, that's its own economy. Or Steam, they have their own economy. So all these games have economies. The question is, how do you treat it? Now, I've never been fortunate enough to start an economy from scratch, and that's really, really difficult. But honestly, what happens with an economy is you set up stuff the best as you can. You have this concept of taps and sinks, which is how much gold do you add to an economy, how much gold do you drain from an economy, and make sure your currency systems are flowing. Same for items, same for XP, and so on. You make those curves and you kind of start testing, you A/B test it and start growing your cohort. And then one fine day, you hit the big green button and you launch it. And that's when kind of the magic starts to come. You see players interact. I remember when I was on SimCity Build It, they actually had to cap off the market at both ends, because sometimes people would crash the economy all the way down to $1 in-game dollars, or they would inflate it all the way up because something was rare. Or like, I play this game called Shop Titans a lot. I've been playing it for 3 or 4 years, and it's a complete crafting game. But you can see that when events happen, right, when the weekly events start, people who don't have time to craft materials anymore, and they skyrocket to the top of the price. And then when the event is over, they crash back down. So you can do a lot of arbitrage that way. So the idea is that it is very, very difficult, and it is a living breathing thing. But the way you look at it is, you look at your analytics curves, you make sure things are going, you make sure it's fair for everybody. It's not that only the people who are paying can really, really have a good impact on the economy. The people at the bottom are lost, and it's a really hard problem to solve. But short answer, the way you control an economy is you think about the taps and sinks, you look at the payoff curves, you look at the yield curves, and you make sure everything is kind of ticking. So it's like a big control panel that you have, and you're
Mhm.
making sure everything is running.
That's a good point. And especially recently with in the United States
Hmm.
experiencing more inflation,
Uh-huh.
like it makes me think a lot more about games and even
Yeah.
what I'm doing in the market
Yeah.
and etc. Because prior to that, we were in a low inflationary environment, and then everything's just going up and to the right.
Yeah.
And then now, we're getting like a major correction
Uh-huh.
to both real world and our digital worlds.
Yeah, so and it's really, really fun when you actually see it happen in front of you. I'll give you an example. When I was at DNA Games, I was working on a game which had very, very high inflation of gold. Like, it was just useless, right? Like, we people didn't want to do anything with it. And then we introduced new features that for the first month were huge gold sinks, but people had enough. But over time, it drained enough gold from the economy that people started wanting gold. And we went from an economy where the gold was so inflated, where to the point it was useless, to the point where people are now hungry for gold and were now complaining that, oh my god, there's not enough gold in the game, so we sunk too much. So then we added in new taps to kind of balance it. So that's the way an economy happens, right? Like you said, the market's super inflated, they add a lot of sinks, and now, based on what's been happening in the market in the
Yeah.
past few weeks, people are like, oh no, we need to get out of this, and they're like, oh, we need to ease up. So it's a constant balance. There's never a right or wrong answer.
You're like the Federal Reserve. It's kind of funny. I never thought about it that way, but it
Oh,
is kind
interesting.
of like a
Yeah.
digital Federal Reserve, really.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Um,
Hmm.
okay, yeah, lots of interesting space happening here, and I'm curious how this shakeup impacts the kind of what people call GameFi or Web3
Yeah.
gaming.
Yeah.
Okay, switching topics again.
Hmm.
I want to talk about cloud gaming
Hmm.
because all the big tech firms are getting into cloud gaming.
Uh-huh.
Luna, Stadia, Meta's in it.
Hmm.
No, or actually even Microsoft.
Hmm.
And I think for a couple years, or sorry, a couple years ago, lots of noise, and then kind of quiet,
Hmm.
and then just recently, the biggest news I saw was I think Microsoft
Hmm.
announcing that you can play Fortnite in the cloud.
Yes.
That was pretty interesting because it's big news.
Hmm.
And I think for me, my takeaway was I guess this enables them, specifically for Fortnite, because they have
Hmm.
the drama with Apple. This
Uh-huh.
enables them to, if you could play some Microsoft X Pass on
Hmm.
mobile, maybe
Hmm.
you could play Fortnite through iOS now. I think
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. I think
that's
that
a
was the
workaround.
news. Yeah.
But besides that, in your opinion, what are the benefits of just doing cloud gaming?
Sure. So I'll give you, I'll put the business hat on and then I put the
Sure.
developer hat on.
Yeah.
So starting with the business side, right? Why do people want cloud gaming? And for
Mm-hmm.
me, the reason for that is that it democratizes games. Growing up in India, the challenge was not everybody had a high-end PC, and most people definitely did not have consoles. So I actually went from an NES growing up to an Xbox 360. Right, I missed everything in between because you
Mm-hmm.
can't afford all the new gen consoles that keep coming out. And some of the most popular games in India were Counter Strike 1.6, Age of Empires, Warcraft
Mm-hmm.
3. And what was common between all of these games? They all had very low system requirements. That was the reason why these games did really, really well. Versus some of the more newer gen fancy games, they would just never run. Like even running like FIFA's as well as Need for Speed, it was a little hard because the requirements kept going up and up. So whereas in cloud gaming, you can actually play the latest Assassin's Creed or the Elden Ring or something new gen from Bethesda, and everybody can play it just for a couple of bucks a month. So I think the business part of it and opening up the gaming world to everybody out there is why it's important to do it. Now, from the developer perspective, why it's important is you have to slice it by kind of let's call it competitive games versus single player games. And the difference is that in single player game, let's take Assassin's Creed, right? It's quite easy to do in cloud games because there's no lag. You don't have to worry about input lag. Fine, you miss a ledge, it's annoying and your character dies, but you can go back and do it again. But with multiplayer games like Fortnite, that you have to be pinpoint accurate. Like even a second of lag will make you lose the match, you lose the battle royale, you could lose currency, you could lose vanity progress. Like there's a lot that happens that you could lose. So I think as a developer, I have to, starting with single player, which is what happened with Stadia as well as Xbox Cloud and so on, is an easier problem to solve. It's just a hard technical problem to scale up servers and so on. Multiplayer is a whole another animal altogether, and that's what I'm really looking forward to seeing about the Xbox Cloud, how they solve that with Fortnite, which is one of the biggest games in the world. You'll have hundreds of millions of players join, and how are you able to establish low latency competitive gaming? I don't know the answer to that, but I'm really looking forward to seeing how the experiment plays out.
That's a good point. Kind of related to cloud games, which historically are focused on taking games with more system requirements
Hmm.
and putting in the cloud.
Hmm.
There's also this trend, I think, in my opinion, driven by Snap in the last couple of years of instant games.
Hmm.
So not like low requirements, but you don't need to download another game. It's like within the app itself, like
Yep.
Snap games, and I find them to be very interesting. So, what are your thoughts about instant games? Like, is it the next era of flash games,
Hmm.
or is it just only Snap is finding some success in that space?
Yeah, I know the Snap has been doing them. I know even mobile platforms have been experimenting with them. Like I've heard, hey,
Mhm.
you don't have to download the whole game, play the tutorial level while it downloads, right? Or you don't have to download it at all. Like why can't you just play in the App Store and connect to the web where the servers live in the web? So I think again, this comes down to starting with the business side. What problem are you trying to solve, right? And as we know in the mobile game industry, hyper casual and hybrid casual games have been really, really big over the last 4 or 5 years. And if I have 10 minutes today, do I really have to go to the app store, find a good game that I like, download it, and I've spent more than 10 minutes just choosing that? Or like you said, like the old school Congregate days or Pogo days or some other website, I just go in and say, hey, I just want to play a game, suggest 5 games, and I click and I play because I have 10 minutes. So I think the idea is reducing that friction to discovery and install. And how they're doing it is they're trying instant games, and it could be fun for low end games. I want to play Snake, right, the classic Nokia game
Mhm.
that everybody in the world likes playing, or I want to play chess, or I want to play cards. Some of the really really easy games that you could do. And how can I get a lot of people to play these? And if I solve that problem, then what is the next level? Can I have instant games in VR? Can I have instant games as a way into the metaverse? Like, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And I think it discovery is one small part of it, but it's the quickness of it, right? We want everything quickly, which is why it's called instant games, that I
Mhm.
want something now. And it's trying to solve that problem.
Okay. My final question for you is I'd like you to critique an idea I'm about to propose,
Sure.
which is tying everything we talked about today
Uh-huh.
together.
Uh-huh.
Because we sometimes you hear things like Web3 gaming is great because of ownership. Like,
Mhm.
okay, fine. Or like, Web3 game sucks because it's a scam, or like the NFT prices dropped to zero.
Uh-huh.
So it's very like narrowly focused. It's never like what's the entire picture, like the economy, what's the
Mhm.
business angle, like what's in it for the user, what's in it for the developer.
Uh-huh.
So I have a theory, a hypothesis, which I want to test out soon, which is one. Okay, so here are some of my assumptions. I think NFTs are here to stay. I'm not talking about their prices, but I'm just saying the concept of NFTs. We
Mhm.
know that even companies like Meta have announced that they're doing it Instagram, and they're gonna probably expand into a different family of apps.
Mhm.
Zuckerberg has announced that. Okay, given that NFTs are potentially important to even big tech firms and huge social networks,
Mhm.
the earlier version of NFTs are all like profile pictures,
Mhm.
right? Profile pictures can be added to avatars. I think avatars are going to be a way we express ourselves,
Mhm.
whether it's like photorealistic, or I don't know the other terminologies, or like a kind of fantasy version of it.
Mhm.
So combining that with instant games, I noticed that a lot of Snap games are instant games that use your avatar,
Mhm.
and their avatar system is called Bitmoji. I think that's a genius move, but I want to hear your opinion. I think it's a genius move because they're kind of ahead of this,
Mhm.
from everyone else. And if we do think in the future our avatars are going to be so integral to us
Mhm.
that maybe the Bitmoji, it just becomes so much more important. We're going to use this identity across different metaverses, different worlds, if
Mhm.
they allow us to get in there, right? Because
Mhm.
now I have ownership of my avatars. Maybe if they allow
Mhm.
us to have ownership of it, and I could take it with me everywhere. And therefore, my theory is if we can somehow, for any of these companies, to gain more, I'll call it metaverse DAO. To gain
Mhm.
more metaverse DAO, I will take engaging experiences, could be mobile games,
Mhm.
and integrate more avatars and NFTs into it. And you're playing as your character, or like your avatar is involved in more ways than it is today.
Mhm.
And I think this is a good opportunity. I haven't fleshed out the exact details yet, but how would you critique this?
Sure. So, to summarize the problem you're saying, you're essentially talking about avatars in relations to NFTs, Web3, ownership, and so on. And if you were to plug an avatar into some of the other concepts that
Hmm.
are out there, what are the thoughts on that?
Yeah, what are your thoughts around what I would call avatar first mobile games?
Sure.
Yeah,
So let me ask a question, right?
sure.
If you had a game that had a really good avatar system but an average gaming experience, or a really good game with no avatar experience, which one would you pick?
I think for now, I would pick the very good gaming experience without the avatar.
Avatar, right? And I think that's the point I was generally trying to illustrate,
Hmm.
that like having the actual core experience be really good is important. And then the avatar is a really nice icing on top because it's your experience, right? But the thing is, if I have a really good avatar, which is you, but you have nothing to do with the avatar, right? Or nothing is something
Hmm.
average to do with it, you really can't do a lot. So let me give you a new gen example of this. this, right? Roblox. Right,
Yeah.
Roblox has an amazing platform where you can play hundreds and hundreds of games. So, and they have a few marquee titles on there. But now that I'm lost in this crowd here, I want to be unique. And they have this avatar system. I think it's getting more photorealistic by the day. And it's about representing myself in this complicated universe that is out there. However, if I was to play a game that Vic developed, and when there are 10 people in there, having a really complex avatar system doesn't really help me because I'm not really getting lost in that system. So, or I'll take Elden Ring, going back to it, right? There is customization in the game, but honestly, I barely bothered with it because I'm playing on my
Right.
own. It's fun to do, and I sometimes I change my sword color and stuff like that, but it's not the point of what I'm trying to play the
Yeah,
game. So
that
I
makes
think
sense.
avatars is really, really important, except that personalization comes after you figure out the core experience. And I will say, if you go back 10 years ago to the web 2 world, I don't know if you've heard of a company called Gravatar, right?
No.
But they did 2D avatars, right? And it was literally icons and like a simple image and so on. But Gravatar is like, that's what they did. Like, I think they still have integrations with WordPress and stuff, but the idea is that you create an avatar, and when you log in into blogger.com and other places, it pulls in your
Hmm.
profile. So it's like a generic profile that connects you to different places across the web. And what you're coming up with is the new web 3 version of it. So
Yeah, yeah,
I think
yeah.
it's really, really smart to have, like, hey, we are the avatar platform, and the same way you have login with Facebook, you have login with avatar web 3, right? And you can just do one, two, three. Imagine if you could use your avatar and you're playing Roblox today and Rec Room tomorrow and Horizon day after, right? It's really, really cool. But you need both the experience to be good and your platform to be good enough for them to want to integrate with you.
Okay. I love what you said. I think you may have coined a new term. I haven't heard of it before, but logging with Avatar. So
Uh-huh.
if this becomes big in 5, 10 years, I want people to come back to this podcast and
Mhm.
note that you coined the term. Well, that was my only question. Is there anything else you want to cover before we wrap up?
Nothing in particular. I really like the
Okay.
questions, and it's fun to kind of think about where the industry is going and where it could be going in the next few years. I think we're at a really nice green field stage where there's all these amazing creators and ideas floating around, and it's about the execution and who can make it to the top, especially in terms of implementation of all the different small concepts we talked about, whether it's avatars, whether it's discovery, whether it's the blockchain side of discovery and ownership, what's the purpose of it. I think we're starting to see some really, really cool products, and I can see it all the way from like a SimCity world on Google Maps where I own property, all the way to CCG games. So yeah, I'm really excited, and as a gamer, I'm really excited to see what's coming out next.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Vic, for your time today. This was a very enlightening conversation today. Thank you.
Cool, cool. This is really fun. Thank you.